CIA torture report. It reminds us how grisly and hellish and morally complex war is. But for all the hellish stories that war always produces, there are always heartwarming stories of how people band together to get through that hell of war. One of those stories from World War II reminds us of the power of books. When World War II started, the book industry published very few paperbacks, but then a gang of librarians launched a movement to send books to our soldiers. Given paper rationing and portability needs, it was clear the GIs needed paperbacks. Thus, 120 million armed services editions of over 1,200 titles were sent to soldiers, including books like The Great Gatsby, which was not considered a classic until soldiers fell in love with it. Having access to books to read during lulls in fighting was so important that soldiers clung to these books no matter what, and every soldier traded them with others, no matter how worn out the books became. One man said, quote, "To heave one in the garbage can is tantamount to striking your grandmother, and you just don't do that." This incredible story is detailed in When Books Went to War by Guptill Manning, who writes, "This is the story of pens that were as mighty as swords." Welcome, Molly. What a fantastic, interesting, captivating story you've unearthed. Talk about what the soldiers said about the impact that these books had on them.
Depending on the book, some men just responded about how they made them laugh when there was nothing really funny about war, but then other books really touched their hearts, like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is kind of a strange book to attract a male audience of young men. But there's something about that book that reminded them of their own families or their own hometowns, and it ended up being something that gave them a sense of purpose in fighting the war.
And as Tori was pointing out, the creation of these books had actually changed the form factor of what people were used to for books in general.
That's right. Before the war, in 1939, only 200,000 paperbacks were printed in the United States. But during the war, every major publishing company got involved in printing these miniature paperbacks. And so the idea of printing paperbacks started to seem like something that would attract a whole new audience of readers. And so by the end of the war, the paperback industry was flourishing, and by 1947, 95 million paperbacks were printed.
And you can see how portable, I mean, Gatsby is already a thin book, but even this little edition, you can put in your pocket and take,
that's
and it
the
doesn't...
whole thing right there.
Yeah, and it doesn't add anything. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
How did it help people use the GI Bill?
I think, well, the average soldier during World War II had an 11th grade education, and he did not read books before the war. But by having access to millions of these miniature paperbacks during the war, I think many people discovered that they actually enjoyed reading books. And so when they had the opportunity to earn a free college education under the GI Bill, they had proven to themselves already that they enjoyed something as scholarly as reading. And so, given the opportunity to get a free college education, I think many people felt that they could do it and actually succeed.
Well, and you look at where we are today. I mean, times have changed. Technology has surely changed. The ways of communication have changed. Still, they turn to reading. And I look at the size of this book. If we could show this, I mean, we've showed it already, but it's so small. You can really just fit it anywhere. It's the size of like a Nook or an e-book, which is what they're reading today.
Exactly. They're about the size of a smartphone almost, and so just as people carry smartphones with them everywhere they go, and pretty much anytime you start feeling bored, you might take it out of your pocket and start playing with it. That's what these books were during World War II. They were an escape from the war, and they were something that gave the men entertainment when there usually wasn't anything else available.
Amber Forever is one of the books on there. I have to ask about that. Why was that a top seller?
That was a top seller because it had sex scenes in it, and so basically, most of the time the men were not around women for months on end, and so anything that maybe captured their interest on that vein was...
All this was also transformative for the authors, right? I mean, we talked about Great Gatsby was not well known, was not considered a classic till the authors got their hands on it. Some of the authors received letters from soldiers communicating with them, and folks said that they'd rather be in part of this Armed Services edition than be in the Book of the Month Club.
Huh. That's true. Betty Smith received over 10,000 letters from servicemen because the book Tree Grows in Brooklyn touched them to such a degree.
Such an amazing story. Thank you for bringing this to light, Molly.